sun. So that helps your immune system, but also just, again, we're not congregating as groups inside because the weather's warm, we're getting outside, so there's a number of factors there. But again, as you point out, you can still get the flu in July.
Also, on this vote, the yeas are 96, the nays are 0. The 60 vote threshold having been achieved, the bill is passed.
So there you go, we get into the specifics of that, and I really appreciate conservatives finally getting upset. It's taken you a long time because you've been quiet for the last 3 years.
Right.
All of a sudden, you're upset about government spending.
Right. Maybe that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
All right. Here's your forecast.
Things could get slushy for a time overnight near the Twin Cities in Minnesota. St. Paul, Minneapolis, down to 31 for a low with some rain in the area. As we look to other cities to the south for Racine, Wisconsin, Chicago, things will be mainly all rain as temperatures are too high to support snow. Over to Interstate 90.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Figured I would try something a little bit different this time. I've never done a sit-down reading review, and since we have this quarantine going on that took effect just last night at midnight, I thought that I would try something a little bit different, mix it up a little bit, and read you all a review that I wrote for this movie, The Patriot, one of my favorites, starring Mel Gibson. It was directed by Roland Emmerich, and it has Heath Ledger and Jason Isaacs in it as well. I first watched this in 2012 when I was, that was 8 years ago, so I would have been 15 years old, 15 or 16. And I believe I watched it around the time that Assassin's Creed 3 came out, and I was really excited about that. Obviously, both are American Revolution based stories, and I recall Connor having a tomahawk and obviously fighting with muskets and stuff like that, and fighting British soldiers and stuff. And so I have that memory embedded, and I really incorporated that memory of the anticipation of that video game into that time, and amongst those memories is this film. So I wrote this as an extra credit paper for my history class. We had to write a paper based on we had to write a paper basically that's a review of a television series or a movie that covers a period in history, world history, covered in class. So in this case, I chose the American Revolution, the 1700s, late 18th century, and let's get into it, okay? Wrote this paper on March 15th. 2020. The Patriot is a 2000 film directed by Roland Emmerich, starring Mel Gibson, Heath Ledger, and Jason Isaacs. I already covered that. It follows a peaceful farmer named Benjamin Martin, based on the real-life Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, as he is forced to lead the colonial militia into a battle against the British Army in the American Revolution. I have seen this film 3 separate times before today, each one leaving a slightly different impression than the last. My initial viewing was on July 4th, Independence Day of 2012. I was 15. To this day, I still remember the specific feelings surrounding that holiday in that particular time and place. My second viewing was with a friend a year or 2 later, and the third was with my brother. I find that a lot of films from this era fall short on the pedestal on which childhood memories have raised them, but despite this being a relatively dated film in terms of special effects, set design, wardrobe, and acting, it has held up remarkably. The Blu-ray edition, which I own, has a way of bringing out the crispness of the celluloid in a way that is very colorfully rich and aesthetically pleasing. The bright red uniforms of the British troops are contrasted nicely against the green farmland backdrop of many scenes. Muskets look authentic, and Benjamin Martin's finely inscribed tomahawk glistens pristine under the direction of Roland Emmerich's cinematographer Caleb Deschanel, who also did cinematography for The Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson and Jack Reacher, among others. I was particularly compelled by two performances in this film, that of Mel Gibson and his archenemy, the brutal and cold-hearted British officer played by Jason Isaacs. Colonel Tavington, played by Isaacs, kills his youngest son in the first act of the film, establishing a very personal hatred and bitterness from Martin. The two encounter each other again before the final battle, and Martin promises that he will kill him before the war is over. In this way, the entire film is a story about a very old idea: sin. More specifically, killing. Martin's opening lines convey this succinctly as he muses about his past and present fears that his own actions may come to visit him. Indeed, they do come to visit him. His sons ask several times throughout the film about the events of Fort Wilderness, to which he responds with a look of repressed horror. Later we find that Martin and his company slaughtered French soldiers to avenge a group of peaceful English settlers. We took our time, he says to his oldest son. I can still hear their screams. Heath Ledger is great in this part. He doesn't react much, but remains subdued, concerned about the psychological toll this has taken on his father. He too knows that no such sin can go unpunished, but he still holds his father in high regard. It is here that the film takes off and becomes a classic, although the beginning was good enough. The stakes are raised continuously higher for the Martin family. With a wife and son dead, Benjamin must balance his own dark past and personal convictions with that of a revolution. His son wants to fight, but he knows all too well the result of warfare. He knows what happens when you repay blood with blood, and he does not want that in the next generation. This is why Martin settled down, tried to live a peaceful life with his family, but the senselessness of his son's death triggered an old instinct in him and brought back the natural thirst for revenge. His life is defined by killing once again. This is such an old idea in human history that it can be found in almost every culture. One that I'm immediately familiar with is the story of King David in the Old Testament Bible. Once he had conquered the many pagan empires, David was asked by God to gather materials for a temple. But David's hands were blood-stained, and his recent sin with Bathsheba still undermined his conscience. So, instead, God ordered that David's son build the temple. And this is in a quotation from the scripture. It is Solomon your son who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. 1 Chronicles 28, verses 6 through 7. This is, of course, where the comparison ends. Martin is neither a king nor does his son build a temple for God, but what does hold is the parallel of the man of war and death. The man who commits atrocities will surely one day pay grievously for those acts, even in a time of perceived peace. Historically, the Patriot is very well-rounded. It portrays the politics and various philosophies of the century in a manner that is acceptable for our history students. I would not suggest it for viewing in a classroom, however, since it is rated R by the MPAA. Several moments are very bloody and disturbing, including heads and legs taken off by cannonballs, musket wounds which produce squibs of blood, and knifing and hacking scenes that could leave some viewers stunned. It does, however, beautifully demonstrate the spirit of colonialism and the idea of all men created equal, as spouted by Gabriel Martin and others. taxation without representation is mentioned towards the beginning in the Capitol building. One black slave works his way into the story about halfway through and is initially disparaged as stupid or ignorant. What the hell would you do with freedom anyway? He's asked as they read General Washington's order. Despite the fact that he was enlisted to fight in his owner's stead, he continues into battle against British forces as a free man. One white militia man turns to him, the one who belittled him before, and says, "I'm honored to have you fighting by my side today." Honored. I really love this extra touch by the writer, acknowledging the obvious hypocrisy of announcing all men created equal in a time when Negro slaves had the legal status of property. It shows a glimmer of light breaking through the cloud of Western hearts as our leaders and thinkers slowly began to reconcile the concept of personhood and, consequently, the fact that Negro men and women were just as willing to die for their freedom as white people. In conclusion, I still love this film as much as I did when I first watched it. This is surprising because, as I said, not everything ages like wine. I think more people should watch this movie. It doesn't really matter why they watch it, but I believe there's something for everyone, including historians and those who merely enjoy action dramas. So that's my review of The Patriot. I know I've never done a movie review in quite this fashion before, but I figured I'd try something different. Obviously, you can see I own this on Blu-ray. It looks pretty great on a flat screen TV. I would say the cinematography and the color and visuals in this film, for the most part, still hold up, which is really, really, really impressive. Another thing I wanted to talk about was Mel Gibson's acting. Now, I mentioned it in the paper, but particularly in this film, it made me realize how Mel can be subtle with just his gestures, eye movement. People don't really bring him up in the conversation of best actors of all time. It's normally Daniel Day-Lewis, Jack Nicholson, Marlon Brando, whatever your list is. Maybe like Christian Bale. He just loses a lot of weight. Leonardo DiCaprio. And certainly those men are all very talented, but Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman. I think Gibson should get more praise for his ability to portray, especially repressed kind of horror and emotion, the way a man of this age and stature, with his past, with the things that he's seen, with the things that he's done with his own bare hands, he conveyed that perfectly. I mean, you could see the horror behind his eyes, and maybe it's because Gibson has some of his own. Obviously, he's been through some stuff, but this came out in 2000, so it was before a lot of his scandals. But everyone has their demons, and if you can find a way to use those demons, to leverage those into your performance, and find an aspect of yourself, dig deep, find an aspect of you in that character and put it in, well, then that's what makes good acting. That's where you get some of the best performances of all time. Anyway, I know this is kind of a long video, but I figured I would post something just so that you all would have something to watch while you're quarantined, while you're, isolated, eating ramen or whatever, or canned food, whatever it is you guys are doing. I've got some canned food, some fish, some chicken, some pasta, burritos, oatmeal, juice, different fruits and vegetables. So I'm pretty well stocked up. Alright, I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, I gotta give this a rating, otherwise it's not really a proper review. I'm gonna give The Patriot an 8.5 out of 10 stars.